Everybody out there is talking about how bad The Flash is doing. Everybody out there is talking about Elemental and how it may signal the end of Pixar. What if I told you that this actually is the worst box office summer weekend we have ever seen? And I can prove it. Let's dive in right now. All right, folks, welcome back to another fantastic day here on the WDW Pro channel. While it is fantastic here, it is not fantastic everywhere. If you are in the movie business, this weekend is dire. And by dire, I mean it is the worst weekend we have ever seen. I'm going to prove it. Of course, we are sticking with the modern era. We're talking about weekends in the summer domestically since 1975, which I think goes back plenty far enough to determine that this is a major problem. It's not just that this is the worst weekend ever, folks. It's that it is a weekend where we have a major DC movie, we have a Pixar film, we are heading into the 4th of July weekend. Everything is lining up so that this should have been a fantastic money-making time of the year, and yet it is not. Strap in as I explain it in a way that the other sites just will not. And folks, as we do, if you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe. You can stick it to the algorithms when you click it. We're talking about the notification bell. We dive in today over at Deadline with Anthony De Alessandro. Elemental and Spider-Verse in Game of Chicken for number 1. No Hard Feelings could upset Flash. It's the Friday afternoon box office. That's the soonest we have at the time of recording. Here's what we've got. 2 animated movies, Disney Pixar's Elemental and Sony Animation's Monolith, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, have punked The Flash and are in a fierce fight for number 1. Let's pause here for just a moment and say that if your movies are catastrophically failing in this weekend, okay, and Spider-Verse they get an out because they're in their 4th weekend. But if your movies are not going to top $20 million, hate to spoil that for you for the rest of the article, but if you're not going to top $20 million, there is nothing fierce about what is going on. This looks like 2 preschool T-ballers fighting in the outfield because one of them picked the dandelion the other wanted. Here's what it says. It says they're in a fierce fight, though, for number 1 at the weekend box office with about $18 million apiece after Fridays that are estimated around $5.4 million each. So let's say it again, folks. Neither of these films, which are supposedly in contention for number 1, will top $20 million at a time, once again, when movie ticket prices are the highest they have ever been and they have far outstripped historic inflationary periods such as what we have today. Now that means that when we have numbers this low, we are talking about utterly empty movie theaters. There is nothing fierce about a competition about very empty movie theaters. It continues, if a bulk of those figures stick, Elemental, which posted one of the lowest openings for a Pixar movie in recent memory? No, actually, when given all of the circumstances, it is the lowest by far. I know this little argument about Toy Story tries to come up. It's not true. We won't spend the video explaining why, but it is the lowest. We'll see a second weekend ease of 39%, which isn't that bad. Again, to Alessandro, though, you got to stop shilling for Disney. A 39% drop when you're this low already is about all you can expect. It's really hard to drop big numbers when you don't have big numbers. That's what's happening here. That will get its 10-day take to $65 million at 4,000 theaters, which is $5 million more than the pandemic disaster Onward. And again, we got to stop shilling for Disney. You know why it's doing $5 million more than Onward at this point? Because Onward was yanked from theaters because theaters closed because of the pandemic. So yes, you are now beating a movie that could no longer play in theaters. Congratulations. That's like limping past somebody who's collapsed in a race. Yeah, maybe you rolled over their fallen body. It doesn't make you any more impressive. Meanwhile, there's no such thing as superhero fatigue with Across the Spider-Verse easing 33% in its 4th weekend, swinging its running total by EOD Sunday to $315 million at 3,785 theaters. By Sunday, Across the Spider-Verse will be pacing 14% ahead of Tom Holland's Spider-Man Homecoming and 5% behind Spider-Man Far From Home. Wow, 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 wow. Of course, it goes to talk about The Flash, which is an absolute collapse. We saw it coming, though, folks. Valiant Renegade, credit to him, was saying that this was a massively front-loaded massively front-loaded movie. Guess what? It is indeed. And although there was some hoopla for no hard feelings, Jennifer Lawrence's hard R-rated movie that features scenes of an explicit nature, probably in hopes that it would drive the young men to go see her, well, it's got to be a little bit humiliating that that is not happening. And perhaps that is a reminder to all that hard R's are hard to get people to go see, simply because they cut out such a huge part of your audience. Is there an opportunity for hard R's to pull in decent numbers and make their movies worthwhile? Sure. And this will no doubt do great when they stick it out there in PVOD. That's where the money's going to be for that movie, PVOD, as they try to grab young men wanting to see Jennifer Lawrence, for better or worse. But Elemental is the big story here, folks, because it is under $20 million in its second weekend. This is as bad as it gets. This movie is dead. It is deader than dead. It is deady dead. And how dead is it? Well, if we look at all the movies combined, what we find out is this is indeed probably the worst weekend domestically in the history of summers. Now let's...
Floral, it's time for you to walk the plank.
What? Why?
Cuz you haven't subscribed to WDW Pro yet. Nor bookmark thatparkplace.com on your web browser to get great articles from great contributors.
What?
Let's run a few caveats here to make it worthwhile. Let's only measure from 1975 until now, because that's the era of the blockbuster. If we go before that, really, it's difficult to get numbers that matter, right? Because movies worked completely differently in the eras that are bygone. However, not only that, but let's take out summer weekends that are like in August and September. Yes, technically, they're part of the summer, but no, they're not really. That's a seasonal terminology when we're talking about summer movies. But the reality is that once kids go back to school, well, those summer flicks are over. And the graveyard of movie times are August, September, probably February, and late January. Those are the times that you put out movies that you know they are going to bomb and they don't need to face any extra competition at all. So let's remove those and let's just deal with from Memorial Day weekend through the end of July. How's that? And if we look at that, we can go to an article out of Vulture that lists out some of those very worst box office weekends. And this, based on the numbers that we pulled with the incredible investigative team over here for the WDW Pro channel, has decided that this is literally the worst weekend up until now that we've ever faced. How bad is it? Let's look. July 1st, 1994, they had The Shadow, Blown Away, I Love Trouble, Baby's Day Out, and Little Big League. Those were the movies that people were seeing at that time. Here's what it says about it. These days, the 4th of July weekend is sacrosanct for Hollywood. Though there were several prior examples of blockbuster early July weekends, 1996's Independence Day, which established Will Smith as the king of that weekend for a time, set the standard. Looking at 1994's 4th of July weekend makes us think that every studio exec mistakenly got the same bad calendar that year. Surely no one thought that any of these movies were worthy of such a prime multi-day weekend slot, right? It goes on to talk about just how poorly these films did. Again, The Shadow, Blown Away, I Love Trouble, Baby's Day Out, and Little Big League. Most of these you've never heard of. One of them, maybe you have. But, folks, can I tell you that these films actually did tremendously better? Let's go into it. You ready? Here's what we can find out. If we go back and look at the domestic openings for The Shadow, for example, it pulled in that very first weekend, which is supposed to be the worst ever, $11.7 million. The next one, Blown Away, $9.5 million. I Love Trouble, $9.3. Baby's Day Out, $4.1. And Little Big League, $3.8. And you say, well, Pro, those numbers are way lower than what we're looking at right now. What do you mean that was the worst weekend ever and that this one has usurped it? Well, folks, prepare to adjust for inflation, because what was the average movie ticket price for 1994? $4.18, Bob. And what is the average movie ticket price for today? Well, if we look at AMC statistics that we have, it is approaching $15 per day. That means that this year and this summer, we have movie ticket prices that are essentially triple or more the numbers that we saw in 1994. So if we adjust these numbers up triply, okay, which is still conservative, well, what do we find out? The Shadow would have made something like $33 million. Blown Away would have made something like $30 million. I Love Trouble, $27 million. Baby's Day Out, about $12 million. And Little Big League not far behind it with about the same. Now, where does that send us, ladies and gentlemen? Well, it sends us to a place where the previous worst weekend we could imagine, from July 1st, 1994, would decimate today's box office. In terms of the number of people going to see the theaters, this is the worst. And it is led by a Pixar film. Pixar is killing the movie theater, folks. And why is it happening? Well, it's happening because Pixar cannot get out of its own way. It can't tell a good story anymore because it chased off all its talent. It can't tell a good story anymore because it wants to tell muddled messages where it inserts all kinds of virtue signals that are easily stripped out when it sends it overseas. That's the kind of virtue that Pixar has. That's the kind of virtue that Disney has. They want to create complex issues for you to explain to your children, but they also want it to be in such a way that they can easily yank it out of there before it heads over to Beijing. That is not a recipe for success, and they've convinced parents they can't trust Disney any longer to take their kids to go see it. Parents should be worried about their kids putting popcorn up their nose, not explaining gender theory to their kids in the car ride home. But that's where we are. That's what this is doing to the industry. And that's why I am optimistic it can't continue, because it's not feasible. It's not economically feasible anymore. This is a failed strategy. Spider-Man is doing fine. That's because it's in its fourth weekend. It should be sunsetting at this point, still holding strong. But The Flash and Elemental, they are dead. They were dead on arrival. They are deader than dead because they are moving nobody to go see these theaters. If we look at the total amount per theater that these movies are making, it is embarrassing. For example, folks, if we look at thenumbers.com, not updated yet for the weekend, but let's take a look at this. You're not going to believe how bad this is. When we're talking about a movie having 4,000 plus theaters donated at this point, and we look at the amount being made per theater, we are seeing less than $1,000 per theater being made by a Pixar film. And it's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in its 8th day. Well, 7th day if you decide not to include the preview. That's not how we function here. But however you want to manage it, essentially in its first week, less than $1,000 per day out of theaters. That is enough to make movie theaters revolt. That is enough to make them sick to their stomachs. Because when you have that few people going to theaters, you have that few people buying popcorn, you have that few people buying sodas, you have that few people seeing the trailers for more movies to get them excited to come back again. This is an abysmal failure. We have never seen a box office domestically in the summer perform this poorly. That's how dead Elemental is. That's what Disney has done to the industry. And the sooner the industry realizes it and has a revolution against Disney, not violently, but simply in saying, you can't keep doing this to us, the better we will all be, because this is unsustainable now. Unsustainable. It is tanking every partner that Disney has. We cannot continue to see weekends heading into July 4th, where we are having the historical lowest revenue ever adjusted for inflation. This is as bad as it gets, and it won't get better. We may see a pop with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, but don't be surprised if the numbers for that film are embarrassingly low and lead us all to wonder how much longer can Disney go forward with content such as this. Well, folks, speaking of content, if you like content like what we're covering here, click the like button, share, subscribe, and when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms. It's the notification bell. The commentary here is over, but we want your comments out there. Drop one down below. We cover your comments. We care about what you think. And I need to say a special thank you to all of you out there. This week, we are on track to top 500,000 views in a single 7-day period. It is a wonderful thing that you all are doing out there. You are the electricity that drives this all. There's not a day that goes by that we are not thankful and grateful for each and every one of you. But more importantly, we have seen fantastic things come about through this channel in the past week. We have exclusively broken news about the Mario franchise, which was utterly positive. We have talked about and analyzed Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning and the good that will be coming to theaters. Finally, they're going to get some respite from this situation. We've also managed to push back the falsehoods that were perhaps being promulgated by one James Mangold and the attacks that were hitting Doomcock, the Salty Nerd Podcast, and more. Yes, we pulled out an interview that Harrison Ford had done that nobody really had discovered quite yet, and we pushed back and we told the truth. And we also saw Floral from Under a Rock, a fantastic YouTube channel out there, top the 1,000 subscriber mark, something we dearly wanted to see happen for a hugely talented channel out there striving to do great content and make people smile. It has been a wonderful week, and we're so glad that each and every one of you has joined us for that. If you missed out on those videos, go back over to the channel and check them out. They're worth seeing. So even though we're here telling you right now that this is the worst box office weekend in history, literally, it doesn't mean that all things are bad. Good is on the way, and good is here, and we'll keep reporting on it because you keep helping us do so. So folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
Make sure to catch The Pro Show Thursdays 5 to 7 Eastern Time. Entertainment Explained, The Culture Curve Conquered, live with Pro and all his friends.